On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. As part of JLF's Brave New World Season 1 Redux, we present our second session today. Peter Carey, A Life in Writing in Conversation with Chandrahas Choudhury. Peter Carey is one of only 5 writers to win the Booker twice and is frequently named as Australia's next contender for the Nobel Prize. He talks about his life in writing with Chandrahas Choudhury. Peter Carey is the author of 14 novels, including one for children, 2 volumes of short stories, and 2 books on travel. Amongst other prizes, Carey has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize 4 times and has won it twice for Oscar and Lucinda and True History of the Kelly Gang. His most recent novel is A Long Way from Home. Chandrahas Choudhury is the author of Days of My China Dragon, Clouds, and Arzi the Dwarf. Last year, his novel Arzi the Dwarf was published in Odia by Sindhubala Choudhury as Bamanna Arzi. Do remember that all our sessions are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. We won't be taking questions for this particular session, but please do comment by typing it into the comment section. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And of course, if we drop off, hang in there and we'll be right back on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Carey, A Life in Writing with Chandrahas Choudhury.
Peter, hello from Delhi. How are you doing?
I'm good. You persuaded me to bring a glass of wine into the room just after breakfast.
Well, I do realize it is very early in the morning for you in New York, but this is drinks hour in India and sometimes in Delhi when it starts at 6 and goes on till 9. So cheers to you. In such hard times, we must do what we can to make sure we stay cheerful. And one way I can imagine of doing that is by reading your novels. And another way, which is a privilege that I get to have, is to have a chat with you in person. And I have to say, this is the best thing that's happened to me in this lockdown. Suddenly they write and say, will you chat with Peter Carey? And people from around the world are going to tune in. And it's the first time also that JLF has ever come to my house. This is where I've been living in Delhi the last 9 years.
Must be cheaper. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, before we start about literature, I wanted to ask you, especially because you live in New York, where I think you moved in 1990, if that's right.
Yep.
What is it like out there? Where are you in the city, and what has it been like for you as a New Yorker?
Well, we live downtown, just where the Brooklyn Bridge comes into the island, near City Hall.
Yes.
And on the edge of the financial district. And in normal life, it's quite a noisy place to be.
Yeah.
There's a hospital at the bottom of the street and a fire station. And so we normally have ambulances going up our street all the time.
Yeah.
The weird thing about this is that the city and the streets are just quiet. So whatever awful pain and tragedies occurring at the hospital, a 3-minute walk away, we don't know because we're not there. And so our whole, it's just a quiet, spooky city. And when we go out on the streets, we have the weird experience of people smiling at you, and you smile at them in sort of acknowledgement of your lonely position in this big, vast, empty city.
Yes. Oh, I think I lost you for a moment. But what is it like for you in a time like this? I suppose, as writers, we observe people, and suddenly there's no people to observe because there's nobody out there, and there's no way that human behavior, which often only changes when people come into relationships with other human beings, all that is shut down.
Yes.
And one of the few trades that goes on as before is that of writing.
Yes. Our life, really, in a funny way, we're very well equipped for this lockdown because my wife and I basically spend our days in the apartment anyway. I'm writing here in this space, and she was a publisher for many, many years, but I'm a literary agent, so she does that from home as well. So at one level, life is not so different. and it's also in a weird way, because there is, of course, we all feel that sort of an overlapping thing of fear about the future.
Yes. Yes.
But there's also something else that happens, you know, when there's nowhere that you have to get to and nowhere you have to do. You don't have to get on a plane. You don't have to get a taxi or go on the subway. And after a few days of this, I don't know what it's been like for you. I felt in a weird way relaxed. And I'm not a very relaxed person.
Oh, really?
In real life.
Yeah, it's a strange kind of reset, isn't it? And I suppose one could say that in another time, one went to literature for this experience of stillness. Because I remember, strangely enough, I thought to myself on the first day of the 3-week lockdown, let's do something that's a big project on a reading level so I can feel I'm using my time. And I picked up the second volume of The Remembrance of Things Past by Prose. I remember I read the first one 7 years ago in a very rushed time in my life, and it really gave a very nice thread through the days and made me feel extremely peaceful. But right now I found I just couldn't stand it. It was too slow.
You couldn't stand it now?
No, it was. It seemed as if it wasn't right for the time now. I needed something a little quicker.
Yeah. Well, it's such. When I began to write, much of what I wrote was short stories.
Yeah.
They all seem to be about sort of things which were not unrelated to the collapse of global capitalism, the collapse of our society as we knew it, and so I inhabited a sort of a space not unlike the one I'm inhabiting now.
Yes.
Back in the 70s and 80s, and now if I sit in this place, how does one even think about how one would react creatively to this space we're in now? I have no idea. It's beyond me.
I was thinking in some strange way, the progression of a novel from a vague image or conceit in the imagination to something very fully formed inside a fact book is a bit like a virus in the way it ramifies, grows, and spreads across the world, and sometimes picks up everything that it attaches itself to. And perhaps I could make use of this opportunity to have to pick your mind a little bit about your process in writing and whether it has changed at all over the years in the 40 or more years that you've been working on novels.
Well, you've spoiled everything, because you really, in your virus analogy,
well, you've got to improve on that, Peter.
Describe my process, but it is exactly that. It does go on, and it does absorb, eat, attach to everything, because we're all great narcissists. I'm not saying, Chandrahas, that you are, but I'll say that I am. And so that when one's writing a book, everything is to do with me, and everything is to do with my book. So the world feeds it continually, and one steals from the world continually. And everything one reads is to do with one's book. And most particularly when one reads one's contemporaries. And the thing is, your book's better than theirs.
Do you find that writing makes you happy, or is it the finished prose that makes one happy? I mean, this is a question I've thought about a lot about my own life as well, and I'm never quite sure which one it is.
I think that...
Or whether there are different kinds of happiness.
Well, there's a huge happiness, I think, when you have a good day's work.
Yes.
And you're right, and because so much of when we're inventing everything every day, it is incredibly hard work, and you are inventing the earth that you're going to stand on. So, but when you have a day when the invention, whether it's the third draft or the fourth draft, but suddenly it's real and it works and it's well made and it's not like something you did before, then you feel really wonderful. And when you're not writing, my wife tells me anyway, I'm not as nice a person as I am when I'm writing happy. So there is, I think the real happiness comes from that daily work when it's working, and the misery when it's not working. But when a book's finished, I think there's a pleasure that comes from the friends who read it, who, with luck, will see in the book what you wanted to be seen in the book. And so you feel good and strong. But I don't think those feelings last really terribly long. And the emotional payback is, as you say, it's a good day's work. And that's a lovely thing.
has there been a reader whose approbation you have in particular desired, or you feel that means the most to you?
There's probably, you know, a couple of 100,000 of them who desperately wanted to like me. Not well. I do remember a weekend in San Francisco where I knew John Updike was going to review one of my novels, and he'd liked the two previous ones.
Yes.
And I was in this hotel room with a violently upset stomach, all on account of John Updike. And it was my wife who went out and managed to find a New Yorker in San Francisco, and it was a good review. But clearly I wanted to be liked. I'm sure we all know that feeling.
You've been an Australian in America for 3 decades now. Do you find the distance in some ways clarifies your images, and it in a way cuts out the noise of new things coming into your head, and you go back enough to take away from it again what you need?
That has been my experience. And of course, you know, these days it's quite easy to talk to our friends. Like I can talk to you. We don't feel as violently separated as we once did. And so I felt, you know, obviously one's country changes, and it's like a river after the monsoon. It's changed its course perhaps a little bit. And the trouble, I think, expatriates often don't realize that the river's changed its course. You know, we've been living out of the country, and I think we've got to be very careful to watch how the river of society has changed in our absence and not make silly assumptions.
Yes.
But mostly I felt in touch, but you know, quite recently there were these horrible bushfires in Australia. Yes. And I grew up with bushfires. I have sort of almost sentimental memories of the hot wind and the local volunteer fire truck and the butcher running to catch up, to jump on the back of the truck to go and fight the fire. And I was talking to my editor in Australia who lives out in the bush about all this, thinking that I was sharing an experience that I knew about and she knew about. But then she said to me, yes, she said, but the thing I'll never forget is the sounds of the animals screaming in the night. And then I knew that she was living in a different Australia to the one that I was imagining. And I think it was the first time in my life that I felt that thing of having really not known something important and intimate about my country.
I remember the first 20 years of my life I lived in India and I never left, and then I went to study in England, and when I came back I suddenly found some bits of Indian English jumped out at me. I remember especially thinking in the year 2002 everyone suddenly used the word rocks as a verb for the first time in young people in Delhi. And I wonder, and that was the same year also, my first people who were from Australia, and I remember one of them on the cricket pitch calling me an ugly old bastard, and I suddenly realized it's a form of affection. This is actually a compliment. He likes me. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how Australian English has changed in the last few decades.
Well, I think the truth is that it adopts. We've always had, we are a colony, right? So we have we really do, whether we like it or not, and want to accept that or not, we still have something of a colonial mindset. And then we will want to desperately not be out of touch with the important things that are happening elsewhere in the world. And we'll be very keen to know, you know, bits of American slang and so on. And I'm sure this is true in India, but perhaps to a lesser extent. We adopt those things very, very, very quickly. And I'm always rather distressed about that. But, you know, I mean, I'm sure that if we looked at the beginning of the country and the way in which, you know, people waited on the docks in Sydney to see what the latest fashion was in London, you know, when people got off the ship, and, you know, and everyone would immediately change what they were doing because of what was done elsewhere. So it's sort of it's our condition, I think, a little bit.
I read your last book, A Long Way from Home, with great interest. And one of the things that really stood out to me and I enjoyed a lot were the motor car bits, because at least in my generation in India, we have a very sentimental attachment to cars coming from the middle class, because it was the first time that they came within reach, and it was part of the great Indian dream from the 80s onwards to most of us remember as childhood as a time. One of the great moments was when your car arrived and you bundled in and you went off somewhere and suddenly the whole world, the look of the world changed.
Yeah.
And there's some wonderful bits there. The idea of making a kind of road trip, in a way, it's very truthful to your work, because you do like traveling in space and time. And but to make this sort of like a picaresque journey across Australia is a wonderful idea. And out of that journey, lots of things emerge when about characters coming to understand the land in a different way.
Yeah. Well, you know, I grew up in a General Motors dealership, and my father and grandfather and mother and brother all sold cars, and all they talked about from morning till evening was cars. And so the weird thing is I really don't know very much about cars. And so when it came time to write this book, you know, I had, it was my brother, who's now 86, who I had to call to sort of see how you change the air cleaner in a Holden. But I started writing the book because at the beginning I was thinking about this Redux reliability trial, a sort of car race. And I remembered it as a child, how we got up in the middle of the night to see the cars that travelled all the way around Australia come through the town, and they were covered with dust and they were beaten up, and some of the drivers were famous, and it was very, very exciting. And I thought, and then I went on YouTube and I found the old newsreels about it, and I thought I'd really like to write about that. And the minute I thought that, I thought, these guys, and they were mostly guys, they're sort of making there's a sort of a white fella map of Australia that they're following, and they're mapping out white Australia, like, you know, dogs pissing on their territory in a way. And I thought it's really interesting, because what they didn't know and what they couldn't see and what they were totally ignorant of was there were much older maps and paths, routes, which was the ones that the indigenous people had been making for 40,000 years. And so that's when it starts with the notion of, you know, in my mind, of these two different sorts of maps. And then that forces me to do something that I've been frightened of doing, which is I really think that the Aboriginal people, it's their history to tell. It should be told. It's been untold. You don't want to be one more well-meaning white man providing misinformation and crap that they shouldn't have to deal with, or that's insulting. But I knew I had to do it. So I did it by the way I would, really just by talking to a lot of people endlessly, not just Indigenous people, but lots of Indigenous people, and working with them through it. I mean, many Indigenous people read the final draft, suggested changes, fixed up my dialogue, which I was grateful for. And all in all, it ended up being, felt like the most important thing I'd done for myself in my life, that I'd finally found a way to meet and talk to my neighbours who I hadn't really met or talked to in all my life before. Not because I was snobbish or standoffish, but the white settlement of Australia moved a lot of people out of places where I lived.
It's strange, isn't it? Sometimes you have to go around the whole world before you can see what's amazing about home.
Yes, it is.
In novels, there are writers who list very strongly towards the third person, and some others who really seem to come alive in the first person. And I'm sure you agree, you are the sort of second sort of writer. When have you found the other kind of writing useful? What sort of situations does third person narration invite? What is it good for? What sort of? Where have you used third person narration, you feel, in a productive way?
Well, I think,
and why was that?
I think I can do, I can barely remember how I wrote Oscar and Lucinda. Maybe, as they say in America, I'd been day drinking. But as my recollection of Oscar and Lucinda is third person, but it's third person that's written close to characters.
Yes.
And with continuing shifts, one character's point of view, another character's point of view, another character's point of view. And I can't really remember, but I feel like I've written a great number of books in that particular way. And I don't really, maybe it was True History of the Kelly Gang,
yes,
where the first person narrative became important. But certainly after that, a book called Theft: A Love Story.
Yes.
Where I started to, and there ends up being a book basically with two voices, two brothers.
Yes.
And I was writing it in the first brother, who's an artist and whatever. And then suddenly I thought of the second brother, who's a little strange, whose language is a little strange, who's very critical of his older brother, who sort of looks after him. And I started to write in this voice, and it was like magic, and I just felt lifted up by it. And I thought, well, this is all very well, but I can't write the whole book like this. And then indeed the book becomes this sort of, these two voices singing at each other. And I think I must have maintained that habit quite a bit since then. And certainly A Long Way From Home has two voices. Maybe it's a bad habit by now. I don't know.
Well, let's try and find out. I always feel it's nice in these discussions sometimes to get to actual bits of text and sort of pick those apart. So I'm going to read out a sentence to you, which I know is something that means something to you. And let's let everyone else hear it and think about what it might mean. In or about the spring of 1870, the ground was very soft. A hawker named Mr. Gold got his wagon, walked down between Greta and my mother's house on the 11-mile creek. The ground was that rotten, it would bog a duck in places. It's all one sentence, and there's only one comma. And usually in novelistic writing, it would be terrible writing, but of course, there is a way in which it can become the most explosive, the most delicious writing, isn't it? And that's what you found.
Well, what the sentence that you've read is a sentence that the outlaw Ned Kelly wrote or dictated to his brother.
Yes.
And it's, of course, sort of, it's at once illiterate and poetic all at once. And it was, for me, coming to look at writing about Ned Kelly, which I did because there was an exhibition of paintings here in New York by Sidney Nolan, wonderful paintings. And I kept on taking my New York friends to see them. And in the end, it ignited my passion for the character of Ned Kelly, who's crudely expressed is sort of like a Robin Hood character. And I thought how little we'd imagined him, how little we knew him, really, even though we thought we did. And so I thought, I'm going to write a novel which is just like this letter that Ned Kelly dictated. It's called the Jerilderie Letter.
Yes.
Which in a rather sweet and naive way, he imagined he would give to the police or the post office, and they would distribute it to the population.
Yes.
And it was I think when I first read that, I'd just read, I was about 19 or 20, and I'd read Ulysses. And so what I find in this illiterate outlaw's letter is sort of an Irish Joycean rant, if you like. And so I was informed by Ned Kelly, I was informed by James Joyce, and I found myself doing things I'd never done before and that I was just thrilled to do. And you have the whole book, doesn't have a single comma in it. What sentences run on into each other. It was a huge high getting that to work in the end, and many depressing things along the way, but a huge high. And well, that was talking about good moments. I think because there was a time in writing the book I thought it couldn't work, it wouldn't work, I didn't know how to do it. And when it finally did work, it didn't seem right that I would get away with it. But,
and that was the true history of the Kelly gang, for which you won the Booker.
yes, I did. I would, it's greedy to celebrate winning it twice, because once really should be enough. But when I won for Oscar and Lucinda, I was younger, and I thought there's something wrong about sort of showing off, or something wrong about being praised. And so the day after the prize, I did a day of publicity, and then I just left London. And ever afterwards, I thought I wouldn't really ever let myself enjoy winning the Booker Prize. I was an idiot. This thing that would happen once in my life, I'd sort of ignored or swept under the carpet. And so when I wanted a second time, which seemed impossible, well, I celebrated.
Well, as we know as writers, one of the great things about arts of fiction is to collapse time, sir. So cheers to you. You've just won the Booker Prize yesterday. Yeah, there's something I find, it's what makes writing fiction, it takes all the pain away, isn't it? Being able to escape one's own personality and being able to be someone else on the page for day after day.
I don't know whether this has happened to you, but it happens less to me now, but it used to happen to me that people would think that the character in the novel or the story in the novel was something about me. And no matter, like so Oscar is me in Oscar and Lucinda. Well, what about Lucinda? Or what about, and I in Theft Love Story, I put them in the town I was born in. So then it becomes biographical. So I spent a lot of my life sort of fighting, mostly Australian journalists, about the notion of what's made up and the joys and freedoms of invention, and I'm having those conversations with a lot of often excellent journalists whose job is to find out what really happened.
I remember there was a little detail, and I've also thought to myself, there's a different standard for what is relevant and what is not relevant in writing fiction. And often some of the most irrelevant things in real life become relevant within a fictional frame. And there was a little detail about an air filter and how it's cleaned in your last book, when they're on this car rally, and she uses a stocking to sort of touch up the air filter. And some of these things are really a way of bringing the past back to life. So how do you, what do you ferret around in to find all those details to make the novel look really
well? I suppose firstly you're sort of looking at, you're making up something which is extravagant and so on. But I'm always informed by how would it really be? What would it really happen? What is it like to take that particular car on this thing? So, I don't remember, but I researched. There was problems with the Holden's air filter, and one of the things you could do to remedy that was stretch a woman's stocking to make a sort of a filter with that over. And given the importance of my female character and her involvement in this race, I thought it would be a really good thing to do, but I didn't know how to do it. So that's where I ring my 86-year-old brother and get him to talk me through step by step, and then send him the pages of the manuscript where I'm doing it, and have him correct what I'd done. But so
siblings can be so useful.
Sorry?
I said siblings can be so useful unexpectedly after so many decades.
Yes, and it's such a practical sort of a thing, but in the context of the novel, it seems wild and magical. Not every day at all. So it's a gift.
There's a question I wanted to ask you, just out of curiosity. Everybody needs something to believe in, and for a lot of fiction writers, it is their own vocation. It's the task of fiction writing, and making up stories is a way of investing meaning in life. Has there ever been a time in all these years of your writing where you had any kind of crisis of faith, where suddenly it seemed to you as if fiction wasn't that important?
Well, I think during the 60s, 70s, I often thought that it was that journalism, good journalism, was more important than fiction
Yes.
writing. And I spent a lot of time sort of pondering this. But the fact is, I'm a sort of an awful journalist. I can't write anything without making things up. And I had a conversation with, I only met Norman Mailer twice, but I sat next to him at dinner once, and I was asking him these questions, and he said, "Are you interviewing me? You're a journalist?" And I said, "You better hope not," because I'm the worst journalist you've ever talked to. Yeah. So I admire non-fiction writer, good non-fiction writing enormously, and but I just accept that I make stuff up, and that's what I'm good at doing, and I'm not very good at. I get into a lot of trouble if I tried to write serious journalism.
Well, it seems like we've just gotten started on what could have been an amazing conversation in the New York bar, McSorley's old saloon or someplace like that. But it's now time to ask you a few questions from people who are watching this program. So maybe I'm going to read one or two out and just let you answer them.
Okay.
There's someone who's asking, are you writing something currently at the moment?
I'm not sure. I don't know whether you can see what you can see. Some of those shelves there are full of sheets of paper.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't see them. I'm not sure. But,
you've hidden them very well behind yourself.
They're behind me. Yeah. Well, the honest answer is I really, really don't know. But I'm writing. Who was it? Was it James? Who wrote down at the Old Hotel? It was what was his name? The American
Joseph Mitchell.
Joseph Mitchell, who used to turn up at the New Yorker every day and write.
Yes.
All those years, no one ever found what he'd written. He was tapping away in his room. I'm starting to worry with this pile here. I'm starting to...
Someone else is asking, writers get the ideas by meeting people. So how are you getting work done in a time of social distancing? It is a question to ask, maybe if perhaps not for the immediate moment where it's only 3 weeks or a month, but what if this were to continue for a long time? What would happen to literature?
Firstly, I'm not sure that the first statement is actually true for me, that you get your ideas by meeting people. I think I get my ideas by thinking about myself. So it's the sort of the self obsession is a continual. So thinking about myself, thinking about why things are the way they are. I think being locked up for would have no impact on me at all, except for the fact of living through this period, which is unpredictable and very frightening in one way, that we are living in a new period of history.
Yes.
So that's going to change us all in ways we couldn't even imagine. And probably the silliest thing anyone could do right now is sit down and write their coronavirus novel, which I would advise against all of the 50,000 people that are doing that right now, because we don't know what it is. We don't know what it's going to do to us. And in a way, the calculating part of me, of a novelist, should think that's very exciting. We're not really human when we say that.
Someone asks, of all your books, which is your favorite and why?
Well, I think my most recent book, I don't really have a favorite. So one just has to find a way to more or less honestly address the question. And I think one way of thinking that my most recent book, A Long Way From Home, it's a book in which I was finally able to investigate and imagine white Australia and its effects on the original inhabitants, and do it in a way that wasn't fake and that made sense to Aboriginal people. So to me, that's something I didn't think I was even capable of doing. And I thought I might get a lot of criticism for it,
Mm.
but I thought it would be a small price if I get criticized. And I failed. So what? At least I tried. So I'm really proud of that book. It means such a lot to me.
Next question someone asks, how do you, well, this is a good question. How do you decide what topic to write on? I suppose it's something that has your staying power because you're going to live with it the next 3-4
Yes.
years of your life.
I mean, I think what you've just said isn't it the defining characteristic of the idea? You know, for me, I always think this is it's a site of investigation. Can you live? Are you interested in inhabiting that site for 3 years? Is there plenty of stuff that you don't know yet that you're going to get out of it? And I never have more than one idea. I'm not one of these people that have hundreds of ideas. When I've finished a book, I think I'll have never write anything else in my life. And so to have an idea is a wonderful thing. And when as you think about it and investigate it and even read around it and you see how rich it might be, then that's it. That's a book. And you might fail, of course.
Yes. Next question. What was the mix of doing research with working off the imagination in writing Oscar and Lucinda?
Sorry, the question about Oscar and Lucinda.
Where did you mix research and inventing details in that book?
Oh, I see. I was terrified writing that because here I am, you know, a colonial gutter snipe, and I've got to write about Oxford University and the Church of England, and I'm trying to get away from doing those things. I tried to invent a different history for Oscar, so he didn't have to go to Oxford. Because I, who failed after 1 year in an Australian university, didn't really feel equipped to write about Oxford. So there was lots of things to find out, and I was driven by immense anxiety that I couldn't know these things. And the anxiety really was what made me work so hard to find out what I needed to know at every stage of the book. But I somehow had a grasp on the two main characters, and I never felt I was faking them, and I felt instinctively that I knew them. And so there's just, you know, like if the things you've got to find out, if you've got a character in a room and the character's got to cross the room, and there's all sorts of obstacles there, you've got to invent what those obstacles are, and you've got to understand why they would be there. And fiction wants there to be obstacles to that journey. So that's a little abstract, I suppose, but there was plenty to find out, and in the end, I enjoyed doing it.
Someone else asks, this is a question we often get asked, do you write every day? They all hope the answer will be no, but we keep on saying yes.
There was a time in my life when I wrote absolutely every day.
Yeah.
But the minute I had kids in my life, that the weekend was invented. So and so from that time on, and they're about 30 now, I take a weekend. But otherwise, I work every what is called a working day. I'm a Monday to Friday writer.
Is there a particular place where you like to work?
Say again?
Is there a particular place you like to work? In your house, outside?
Here, where I'm sitting. That's.
And how do you get started? I mean, there is that jump between reality to your own reality, which sometimes can be a little tricky, isn't it? There's so many things to keep you back in the world where you are.
I think the trouble with me.
Yes.
You're clearly more balanced than I am. I think that the problem with me is that when I'm out in the world, I'm all the time living in my book and thinking about it, and so I live in that world most of the time, and I can still remember. I'm a very poor swimmer, but I remember when I was writing Oscar and Lucinda, doing laps in a pool in Sydney, and I'd be swimming in my ponderous, awful way, and I'd be thinking, if that happens, therefore it follows such and such turn. So I was spending all my time I was meant to be clearing my head, but I was in the center of my book.
This is the last question, I'm afraid, but it is a good question. It's something I've thought about too. When I know you've written one or perhaps a few more books for children, and a reader asks, in writing them, do you draw from your own childhood?
No. No, it would be my childhood would be like writing about the planet Mars.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think my childhood wouldn't be. It wouldn't feel like anything that my children would recognize in any way at all. And in fact, I remember, this is not quite the same, but my dad was a car salesman. Yes. I spent a lot of time waiting for him in cars, often outside country pubs while it got dark, and I waited and waited. And I explained to my younger son why I was quite good at waiting. And I told him that I'd done this. And he said, well, didn't you have a Game Boy? This was a while ago, you can tell by the toy. The Game Boy. And I said, no. And he said, not much of a life. So my childhood doesn't always connect with the childhood of my children, but if that's enough.
If I were to quickly tag on before we end, but does having children sort of bring one's own childhood back in ways which otherwise there would not be a path back to that world? They do things that sort of bring it back to you, or say things.
I really, really don't know. I mean, I think the thing about that relation, this is to not answer your question, I'm so sorry,
sure.
but is that you wish for your children that they feel no pain, that everything, that because you're so fabulous, their childhood is going to be just fabulous. And then, of course, it's not. And they feel pain, and you feel bad. And you love them, yeah.
Well, Peter, this is what is so terrible about this session. Just as you're getting into a good chat and you're ready to mix a second drink is when we have to end and everyone has to go back. But what are they going back to? They've got nothing to go back to. They can listen to us for another 2 hours if we want to keep going on. No one's going to be cross with us. But it was such a great pleasure having a chat with you. We have never met in our lives, so as good a way to meet as any. There's some good things about the lockdown too.
That's a really lovely way to meet.
Cheers to you, sir.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chandrahas, for that beautiful session. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. And please do remember to log in next week to continue to view JLF's Brave New World.